Hey, what's up YouTube? Chris Sider here, founder of Ex-Boyfriend Recovery, and today I'm making this video to teach you when you should be contacting your ex after a breakup. Now you may be sitting there and wondering if this is the most important question that you should be asking. And if you were to ask me, it's probably not. In my opinion, the most important question that you need to be asking is whether or not you have a chance of even getting your ex back. Believe me when I tell you that there is nothing worse than trying to get an ex back and constantly failing because you're not in a favorable situation. So luckily, I've actually put together a special quiz on my website designed to answer this exact question for you. Basically, all you have to do is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video. You'll click on the link and it will take you to my special quiz that's going to ask you questions about you, your ex, and your relationship or your time together. Now, based on how you answer those questions, we're actually going to take your answers and run it through an algorithm that we have pre-programmed based on my experience and what we know to be true about getting exes back to give you a score or a range of score that will give you an idea of where you stand with your ex and if this is even going to be worth your time. So again, if you're interested in taking this quiz, it should only take you about 2 minutes. It's completely free. All you have to do is simply look in the description link of this YouTube video. Okay, so when should you be contacting your ex?
Today we're going to be covering how long you should wait to contact your ex, specifically how you should do it and if you should even do it. And there's really 3 concepts that I'd like to cover with you today. Concept number 1 is something I like to call the 3 time frames. If you didn't already know, one thing that we highly recommend throughout our process of trying to help you find a way to get your ex back is something called the No Contact Rule. The No Contact Rule has been a staple of our strategy for 6-7 years now, and we have been able to connect it to 100% of our success stories within our private support group and around 70% of our success stories from our websites as a whole. And I would even go as far as arguing that the No Contact Rule is actually more effective than the 70% mark will have you believe, because a lot of times when people tell me that they've gotten their exes back, they don't specify what strategies they use to get their ex back. They simply say, hey, Chris, I got my ex back. Thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. If I were to argue, I'd say around 25% of our success stories are just simple messages like that. They don't really go into the detail that really needs to be gone into. So I would argue that the No Contact Rule is one of the most essential strategies for getting your ex back. And one of the biggest questions when it comes to the No Contact Rule is how long should you be doing it for? Well, how long you should be doing it for will also help you indicate how and when you should contact your ex, because you should only be talking to your ex after this No Contact Rule. And I've come up with something I think is a very clever way of handling the time frame problem with the No Contact Rule. So I've come up with something I like to call the 3 time frames. This is the 21-day rule, the 30-day rule, and the 45-day rule. The problem with the No Contact Rule is a lot of times you're not going to know which time frame you should be using until actually you've started the No Contact Rule, right? So what I try to teach my clients, especially on coaching calls, to do is always start out with a standard 30-day No Contact Rule. And then based on how things go, how events occur throughout this 30-day period, it will tell you whether you should shorten your No Contact Rule or elongate it. Like, for example, let's say you've started out with a 30-day No Contact Rule, and on day 7, your ex has sent you 25 text messages. All those text messages are really positive and close to begging for you back. In this case, it might be smart to shorten your No Contact Rule to 21 days. You're not going to need as much time to probably get an emotionally unstable ex like that back, especially if he or she is emotionally unstable in a positive way. Now, on the flip side of that, if you go through a 30-day rule, your ex hasn't contacted you at all, you think that you need more time, or your breakup was really, really bad, it might serve you to elongate your No Contact Rule to a 45-day rule. So that's how I think the 3 time frames should be used. Always start out with the 30-day rule, and then based on how events occur throughout this 30 days, you either shorten or elongate it. So that's concept number 1, something I want you to keep in mind, because really I can't really sit here and tell you, oh yeah, after 50 days you should contact your ex. After 7 days you should contact your ex. It's really going to depend on how long you do your no contact period for, and specifically, concept number 2, if you've created a paradigm shift. Now, what is a paradigm shift? Well, a paradigm shift is simply another way of solving a problem or another way of looking at a problem. Like, I like to think of it as outside the box thinking. Now, paradigm shifts are often harbingers of change. Change is the one constant throughout. After a paradigm shift occurs, something will change. Or a paradigm shift can occur when something changes. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, your trajectory will look something like this, right? A breakup will occur, and then over time, you'll do enough to create a paradigm shift for your ex so that by the time that you talk to them again, they're a lot more captivated with you. Now, I can actually tell you a story of something like this that actually happened to me in real life. When I was 21 or 22 and I was in college, I sat next to a very, very pretty girl. Now, the girl was very pretty, but the one sort of big issue, and this is going to paint me in an awful light, and I hope it does paint me in an awful light, just because I want to show you how shallow some men can be. The one reason I never went on a date with this girl was because I thought she was a tad bit overweight. That's horrible of me to say, but it's how I felt at the time. We exchanged numbers, of course, and we talked, and she went as far as asking me out on a couple of dates. I always found a reason not to go on these dates, whether not responding to her, saying I was busy, what have you. And potentially I was weirded out by the fact that she was asking me on a date. That's never happened to me before. Anyways, a couple years go by, and I'm still at the same college, so is she, where we haven't seen each other in maybe a year. And I'm walking down the hall with my friend to get to my car after my last class, and I happen to run into her. And I'm just struck by how beautiful she has become. Not that she was more beautiful then than she was before, it's just that now she had clearly gone to the gym and lost some of the weight that I had sort of used as a reason to not want to date her. Again, super shallow, super, super rude and wrong of me. But it created this paradigm shift. I looked at her in a different light. I perceived her differently. And it went as far as even having my friend look to me and say, dude, what was wrong with that girl? She was gorgeous. And it inspired me enough to try to ask her out on dates. But this time, interestingly enough, the tables have turned completely. Instead of her asking me out on a date, I'm asking her out on a date. And instead of me standing her up, it was her standing me up. Now, I told you that story for a couple of reasons. Number one, to show you that I was as shallow as the next guy back then. Number two is also to show you the power of a paradigm shift, the power of a perception change. You do not want to contact your ex until you have a paradigm shift underway, until you've told the story you want to tell, or until you're able to kind of have your ex do that double take. That is what you are waiting for. That is how you should be using your time during the no contact rule. But how do you go about doing that? Well, that's where concept number 3 comes into play. Concept number 3 is indirectly prepping your contact strategy. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is the power of social media. This is a Huffington Post article that got released in 2012, which was about 6 or 7 years ago, but I still find that its contents are very much happening today, in which someone who was doing a doctorate or a graduate study in the University of Western Ontario found that nearly 90% of people will Facebook creep on exes, meaning they will look at your profiles after your breakup. Now, if you understand this, you can actually use it to your advantage. You can control the narrative or tell a story that you want your ex to see. This is perfect, especially when it comes to creating that perception. Right? If you were viewed as emotionally unstable, if you were viewed as potentially rude or something, you can find ways to combat this indirectly without contacting your ex directly, right? So I'll give you a perfect example of this. I was working with a client last year, and she was really, really confused about how she should contact her ex and when she should contact her ex. And so we came up with this idea of prepping her contact, right? So it just so happened they were in a long-distance relationship, and what was going to happen was in a couple of days, she was actually going to be in his area, not to see him, but for a work event. I think they met through work or something like that. And what ended up occurring is rather than just texting him and saying like, hey, I'm in the area, do you want to get some drinks? I said, that's the wrong way to approach this. He needs to see this happen from afar so that he doesn't think you're there for him. So I started asking her, well, what are some of his favorite things, something that will get him to perk up and pay attention? And she said, well, he's a big fan of Game of Thrones, right? So I asked, well, which character does he like specifically? And he said, he really likes Daenerys Targaryen, the Dragon Queen. So I took this exact picture. I recommended that my client take this exact picture and actually Photoshop her face onto it, and then caption it by saying posting this photoshopped picture with her face as the Dragon Queen and saying something like, hey, check out my new ride as I go into the ex's hometown or something like that for work on Thursday. Now, the intention here is to catch your ex's interest because it will show up on his newsfeed. It was on Facebook that this occurred. And get him to understand that she's not going to be there for me. She's being there for a work function. The crazy Photoshop thing was just to capture attention and also potentially get some other people to chime in. Well, what ended up happening is he not only immediately liked the photo and commented on it, but he texted her. And he said something like, hey, I saw you're coming into my area on Thursday. And then, of course, she goes, yeah, I sure am. And then he goes, you want to meet up? She got an instant date out of simply prepping her text messages. Now, do you have to use some crazy Game of Thrones picture Photoshop thing? No. You don't. What you need to understand, though, is you need to create a paradigm shift, right? You need to find a way to get your ex to look at you differently. That's all I'm saying here. You'll notice there's an interesting synergy between these three concepts. This concept really tells you about how long you should wait to contact your ex, right? The 3 time frames. The second concept is basically what you need to be doing during that time. And the third concept is actually how you do it during that time, if that makes any sense. Here's my point. Results like this aren't common. That's only happened to one client with prepping. But every little thing that you do, especially when you're trying to get your ex back, matters. Make sure you're telling the story that you want to tell. If you're emotionally unstable, your ex views you as emotionally unstable, find a way to combat that perception. Find a way to get a paradigm shift in place.